screaming at him to get off of me. Get off of me, just get off of me. His grip was like a vice. When he got his hands on me, he would drag me around like a rag doll.
He just wouldn't let it go. He would never let me be free. He said he'd see me dead first.
He said, "What is it you don't understand, bitch? I don't love you anymore." All I knew is I had to stop him because I knew I was dead.
On Mother's Day, 2004, Bob and Nancy Seaman had an argument. Nothing too serious. Nancy wanted to borrow Bob's car and help their younger son move home from college. According to Nancy, it would be the second to last argument they would have in their 31-year marriage, a marriage that she claimed was damaged and fraught with verbal and physical abuse. The next morning, after what Nancy said was a confrontation in their kitchen, the two ended up in their garage, where she bludgeoned Bob with a hatchet. After she'd struck him more than a dozen times, she then slashed and stabbed him over 20 times more, this time using a knife. Then Nancy, a fourth-grade school teacher, cleaned herself up and went off to work.
What makes somebody snap and start hitting somebody and stabbing them many, many times? Something's going on. Something is not right. Somebody's lost their mind.
As I get up, I feel the handle of the hatchet. I pick it up and I swing it at him. And it swiped him across the face. But I just swung it at him.
If you had to go to central casting and pick someone out that represented kind of a middle class, upper middle class kind of person who was leading a typical suburban lifestyle, I think you would choose Nancy Seaman. She was a suburban housewife, a teacher, married with 2 children.
In the 31-year marriage between Nancy and Bob Seaman, it was not a good relationship. It started out, there was domestic violence at the beginning of it, but then she hid the abuse because that's pretty much across the board with women, is that they try to protect their children so they don't tell them the truth because that's their father.
Nancy had to make everything look perfect because that image of, I have to keep this marriage going. I am a failure if I don't. It's a humiliation if she leaves.
The murder happened at the time when she was moving out. And this is the classic thing with batterers. When the woman says, I've had enough, I'm leaving, that's when they get really scared and threatened, and that's when they act out the most.
We intend to present evidence in this case that Mrs. Seaman is a classic battered wife, that she was the victim of physical abuse for years, that this incident was as a result of legitimate self-defense.
It's hard for anybody in general to make sense. Why didn't she call the police? Why did she do all this cleanup? And so it's hard for any of us to make sense of that because we weren't in Nancy Seaman's shoes.
May 10th, 2004 was different. It was different than all the other times that she was abused. How was it different? It was different because you're going to learn in this case that Nancy thought she was going to die that day. There was no plan. There was no plan to use that hatchet against Robert. There was no plan to murder her husband. Nancy was acting in legal self-defense. And we're confident at the end of this case that you will find her not guilty. Thank you.
She suffered 30 years of domestic violence. She went to the police 3 or 4 different times. There really was no action taken. It might have been the mentality back then in the 80s, 90s, that spouse abuse, it's okay. You're married and those things occur and it's kept in the bedroom. So Nancy, she lived with it.
Bob Seaman spent the last week of his life in Arizona with his brother, Dennis. He was looking forward to returning to Michigan and filing for a divorce. Bob Seaman never got that chance. Within 24 hours, Bob Seaman lay bloodied and butchered on his garage floor. That person wasn't a stranger. It was Bob's very own wife, the person he intended on divorcing, Nancy Seaman.
When you think of Nancy, you would never pick someone like this up and say, oh, that person's going to end up committing a crime and going to prison.
The evidence in this case will be compelling. It's going to be overwhelming. It will also be very disturbing. When this case is over, you will know several things. First, you will know that Bob Seaman died a gruesome death. Gruesome. Most importantly, you will know that the defendant had time to think about what she was doing. She had time to make decisions and choices. She chose to be a killer.
My mom told me, my dad said, you should just die, or something like that.
According to Nancy Seaman, her new marriage was wonderful for about 2 weeks. Then came the first signs of abuse. Her friends and her family remembered seeing the bruises. Bob's brother and sister said they did not. And Nancy never until the last months of the marriage blamed Bob for her injuries. Divorce was on the horizon. The question was, who would leave first?
They had been living separate lives for the last 6 months or more. He pretty much was at the point where, he was going to get a divorce, and he knew that there wasn't any love left and it was time to move on.
Nancy and I are the same generation. We were taught you will get married, you will have kids, you will find a good husband who provides for you, and you will take care of your husband. You cannot leave. There's no way you cannot divorce. So we learn this helplessness. We learn that we can't make choices. We can't get out of that.
When you talk to the police, when they were talking with you about seeing Bob or whatever, you told them that he lived in Dearborn Heights, correct?
I might have said that.
Were you aware that they never lived in Dearborn Heights?
Couldn't have told you much about it.
You also told the police that he resigned from Borg Warner. He was fired, wasn't he?
I have no idea.
But you told the police he resigned.
If that's what I said.
You don't dispute that?
Weren't allowed to be very close with him, were we?
Well, I get to ask the question, sir. You don't.
He was the one that was in pretty rough shape. He was fired. So he's the one that needed Nancy Seaman. He's the one that needed her insurance, her stability, her job stability. He was now getting ready to lose his house because he found out that she was the one that had already had a place to move out because she was leaving him.
Bob was explosive. Bob could be very, very gregarious and yet very, very explosive. If things did not go the way he wanted them to go, I many times stood before him with him yelling in my face with clenched fists, and I would wait until he was done and then tell him that we would have to solve this in another fashion.
How would you describe your relationship with Bob?
I would describe him as my best friend. I introduced him to my colleagues as my other brother. We were very close. We'd see each other 3-4 times a week.
What was your relationship with the defendant like? Did you have a relationship with her?
Initially, I thought we had a good relationship. The past couple years, my relationship with her was not, it was just cordial. I didn't have a bad feeling toward her, but I didn't like her. I didn't want to be around her.
Isn't it true that Nancy begged you to stay out of the family problems that were going on?
She never said that to me. When she called me, she threatened me. She called the police on me and wanted to have me arrested. She said I assaulted her.
In my opinion, she would be considered a peaceful and nonviolent person, yes.
Never had any confrontations with any other teachers that you're aware of?
None that I'm aware of.
She's just a great teacher, and everyone in the school, parents, children, staff members, respected her for her professionalism, the way she conducted herself.
Did you observe any abuse of any kind between your mom and your dad?
Certainly.
What, if anything, did you observe?
Almost constant verbal abuse all the time. He would constantly belittle my mother, her profession, all the choices that she made. And there was also physical abuse that I personally observed.
What did you observe as far as physical abuse?
On a couple different occasions, I saw him hit her with his forearm, kind of shove her out of the way.
You obviously love your mom a lot.
Me too.
You talk to her. You're very close to your mother, right?
Certainly.
Okay. When's the first time you told anyone in law enforcement what you just testified to today?
What part of it? Any part of it?
About your dad's violent and your mom had bruises caused by your dad.
I think the only time law enforcement wanted to question me after this happened was at the station, and pretty much all that I said was that I had seen my father strike my mother, and they at that point did not want to have hit my mother, and they did not want to have anything to do with me after that.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
Yes.
You gotta see.
What was your relationship with your father like?
My dad was more than my dad. He was also probably my best friend in the whole world.
What was your relationship with your mom like?
I had a great relationship with my mom.
At any time, did you suspect domestic violence was occurring in your parents' home?
Not at all.
Well, obviously, a mother kills a father. You can imagine what that does to children. And it divided these children completely. One son justified it and felt she was justified because of the abuse. The other said, I never saw any abuse. It's very, very dramatic to see what happens to a family under these circumstances.
There was never any evidence of it. My mom was never an abused wife.
I don't know how to tell you this, but you do not say anything, okay, anything about the case at all to Jeff and Becca.
I was shocked at the hearing today because he has been at the house and seen bruises all over me within the last 6 months.
I know.
I can't believe they did that. I've seen bruises all over me.
Did your mom ever say to you, I'm afraid of your dad?
No.
Did she ever show you bruises and say, you got to know what's going on here in case you find me dead one day?
No.
Your mom ever tell you that your dad said that he just wished that she would die to end the relationship?
My mom told me that she was talking to my dad and said, what can we do to work things out? And my dad said, you should just die, or something like that.
The fact that the two sons had differing points of view or different testimony definitely was difficult for all of us.
Jeff, you were really close with your dad.
Yes.
Right? You idolized him.
Yes.
I think the older son just seemed more credible to us, or the younger son was not.
It appears that you're going out of your way to shoot down every single thing your mom is alleging as a defense in this case.
Why would I do that?
I don't know.
If my mom's guilty or innocent, my dad doesn't going to come back. Either way. My dad is gone. This trial is not about my dad.
It seemed to line up with the evidence that we had, with no reports, no one coming forward and telling us that basically that this was an ongoing problem with the family.
They're trying to probably screw you.
Yeah, but screw the owner.
I know.
I can't believe they did that on me.
So just calm down. Okay, we got a good lawyer. Okay?
As the moments went by, I then started to notice a slight odor of a decomposing body.
Questions swirled around the murder of Bob Seaman. Did Nancy kill him Sunday night, May 9th, when he returned home from Phoenix, or Monday morning before she went to work? Why'd she go out in the rain on Sunday night to buy a hatchet? And then why did she shoplift a second hatchet only to return it a couple of days later? And most importantly, was Nancy a battered wife, driven to the edge by years of abuse? Or was this premeditated first-degree murder, plain and simple?
What we discovered was that on Sunday, which was Mother's Day, both of Nancy's sons had been at the house celebrating with their parents. After they left, at some point, Nancy went to a local hardware store and purchased the hatchet. And what was odd about that to us was that this was a Sunday night, it was after dark, it was a driving rainstorm that night, and she felt compelled to go to this hardware store and purchase a hatchet. She then went back a couple days later, and we saw her on video go into the store. She selected the same hatchet, put it under her coat and shoplifted it essentially, walked out, and then came right back to the return desk with the original receipt and returned that hatchet. So I don't know what was in her mind, but our assumption was that she was trying to cover up the purchase of the hatchet by returning it.
I was concerned now that my dad was missing because his Explorer was in the driveway and he never went anywhere without his car. So I called my mom and talked to my mom. I actually called a couple of times and she finally picked up the phone. And we talked for a couple of minutes and basically I asked her where Dad was and she said, I don't know, we had a big blow up this morning and he grabbed his passport and her mad money. She kept like money in a cookie jar for, you know, to blow on stupid stuff. And he left the house, she said.
We suspected something was wrong because he was always in contact with one of us. I went over to the house to see if the car was there or if Bob was at home.
What happened when Nancy opened the door?
Well, she was startled to see us, and I asked her if she had seen Bob, and she says, no, he was here this morning, but I haven't seen him all day.
With this case, the front desk took the report and thought that it just needed a little bit quicker attention, so it was brought back to the Detective Bureau, where I was working at the time, and my supervisor assigned myself and another detective, Larry Featheroff, to go out to the scene and investigate.
Did you go to the Briarwood Court address on Wednesday, May 12th this year?
Yes, I did.
Why did you go there and what time?
At about 4 o'clock that afternoon, a report was filed with our department, or came to our attention at that point, or my attention, that a report was filed regarding a missing person. That person was Robert Seaman, a resident in our city. At about 4:25, Detective Featheroff, myself, and Sergeant Hubbard, also signed the Detective Bureau, went out to the Seaman residence located, like I say, in our city near 13 Mile and Halstead.
Did anyone answer the door?
Not initially. After a few moments, though, it was answered by Nancy Seaman. At first, she seemed completely normal. I told her why we were there, that we were investigating the report of a missing person, her husband, Bob. Nancy and Bob were both living in the same house. She lived basically in the upstairs, and what we learned was that Bob lived in the basement.
What did she say upon answering the door?
She immediately said that she was happy that we were there because she had been getting ready to call us. I asked her when the last time she had seen Robert was, and she had said this was now Wednesday. She said the last time she saw him had been Monday morning, about 7 in the morning. She was getting ready for work. We sat actually for about an hour just speaking with her and asking her where her husband could be. She said she had no idea, but one of the main points that we were concerned about was the fact that her brother, or Bob's brother, had mentioned that he never misses work, and he owned a batting cage facility in Northville, and that was the most concerning, is that he hadn't been there for a few days.
What happened after you left the house?
We all walked out the front door, and at that point asked if we could look in her vehicle. She said that we should probably look in Bob's Explorer, which was the newer one. Nancy finally agreed to let us look in her car, and she unlocked the front portion of it, and I asked her about looking in the back. So she walked to the back of the Explorer and opened up the hatch and kind of stood in front of the door in between myself and the car, and just kind of put her hand on the cardboard and told me that that was painting and moving supplies for her condo that she was buying. I lifted it up after she had pushed it down to look underneath, and I noticed it was a blue tarp, similar to the kind that you get at an ACO, and it was long. It was wider at the end where I was, and then it tapered down
As I looked at it, I noticed a great deal of silver duct tape wrapping it up. Noticed that there was a lot of what appeared to be dried blood on the tarp and the duct tape. And as the moments went by, I then started to notice a slight odor of a decomposing body, which unfortunately I'm familiar with. And I told her at that point that she was under arrest. And she said, "It was an accident. He was beating me."
She claims he attacked her. She went into the garage. She had bought this little hatchet. She claimed that it was a garden kind of thing. She picked it up and struck him, and struck him a number of times and killed him.
The murder weapons were ultimately found wrapped up with Bob in the tarp.
Can you take a look at that, please? Do you recognize that?
It appears to be the same hatchet that was in the vehicle.
Is that in the same condition as when you discovered it?
Yes.
So there was a lot of evidence left behind of where the crime actually happened. She had bought bleach and cleaned the floor, but when we pulled up tile, there was blood underneath the tile.
It appeared as if the vehicle had been wiped down with a wet rag. You can see faint red tint, which we believe is blood, which had been wiped from the vehicle, but had smeared across the hood of the vehicle.
What does that show?
It's just showing the area of drywall appeared to be freshly painted.
So when she kills him, all I think Nancy knew to do was to clean up and make everything look wonderful, restore it, because she'd done that for 31 years.
She went into school and she looked a mess. She was a mess. I don't think she knew what she was doing. She went in to teach because she did not get a substitute teacher, another way to show that this wasn't premeditated.
Do you recognize this?
This is the receipt from Myers, which I located inside of Miss Seaman's purse. And inside there are also 3 receipts, one of which showed the purchase of a hatchet, a tarp, and latex gloves.
What the evidence pointed to seemed to be a lot of planning, both before and afterwards. She did a pretty good job with covering up the crime and cleaning up the scene, and it probably would have worked out had she disposed of the body.
Were you able to determine the cause of death in this case, doctor?
Yes, the cause of death were multiple sharp force injuries that were sustained to the head, neck, chest, and back. At least one blow, multiple chop injuries, slashes, and then stabs. And the manner of death was homicide.
Were you concerned at all for Nancy's safety?
I was concerned.
According to Nancy Seaman's friends and family, she was a peaceful, honest person, a great teacher, and a loving mother. But the Dumbledons, Bob's close friends, disagreed, telling stories of Nancy's outbursts at Bob's work and threats made against their family. And what about Bob? Was he a calm and easygoing guy or someone prone to fights? Nancy had bought a condo for herself and was planning on moving out. Bob was talking divorce. The clock was ticking on the Seaman marriage.
Since you know Bob for so long, do you know what his reputation for truthfulness?
Well, Bob had 2 extramarital affairs that I don't think he told too many people about.
Can you tell me what Nancy's reputation is for truth and honesty?
Very truthful, very honest, very giving.
What was Bob's reputation as far as you were concerned for his reputation for truthfulness?
I would say he didn't have a reputation for truthfulness.
Were you aware at all of his reputation for anger and violence?
Yes.
What is that reputation?
Arrogant, controlling, violent.
Did you see any injuries on your mom?
I saw bruises all the time on her arms and legs. And there was one time I saw a black eye.
Did you ever see any sign that there was a physical fight?
The only thing that Nancy ever showed me was a bruise on her arm, and that she claimed was caused by Bob, and she complained of a hairline fracture that she also claimed was caused by Bob. I told her that if this is what was occurring, that she needed to leave and get out before serious injury occurred.
During that time period, were you concerned at all for Nancy's safety?
I was concerned.
There's no question that there was heavy abuse. There's no question through the neighbors, through the youngest child, that there was heavy abuse on Nancy. It was a one-way street.
I recall a black eye, and I recall some kind of arm brace. I asked her about it in a very non-confrontational way, and she changed the subject.
I've seen a black eye, bruised up face, marks on the hands.
Did she ever tell you how she received those injuries?
I asked, and she just kind of, well, I bumped into the door or banged into a table. But she never really looked me in the eye when she was saying.
There's 31 years of her surviving that kind of abuse, and you don't tell anybody because you have to pretend and you have to make everything look perfect. I am a failure if I don't.
I found some extensive bruising on Nancy, especially on the upper extremities. They were mostly on the back of the arms, and that's consistent with defensive injuries.
She has defensive wounds on her. Everybody agrees that she had defensive wounds. This was a self-defense. This was a heat of the moment. It was not premeditated murder.
Did you see any injuries when she removed her shirt and went down to her underpants?
No.
So no injuries to the chest?
No.
To the belly?
No.
To the back?
No.
Nancy chose to not report a lot of the abuse and just eat it and just live with it. And it came back to haunt her.
There's so many reasons why women don't call the police. And unfortunately, a prosecutor, the parole board, judges, society, everybody holds it against them.
Did your daughter tell you that he threatened not only to kill her, but he was going to go to your house and then kill you too?
That's right, he did.
Okay, and take everything you own?
Right.
And who told you that?
Who told me that?
Yeah, who told
My
you?
daughter told me that her husband told her that.
The last time she spoke to me in March, she did mention that he was becoming violent and that she was afraid.
In cases of prolonged abuse, there's pent-up rage. I mean, if you're abused long enough and then it gets released, the accumulation of that rage comes out.
What was the last thing that Nancy said to you before her arrest?
Pray for me.
I never thought about death. I never thought about killing. I never even thought about hurting him. I just wanted him to stop hurting me.
Was what happened that Sunday night, or perhaps that Monday morning on Briarwood Court, premeditated murder or self-defense? Would putting Nancy Seaman on the stand help lower the charge against her to second-degree murder or even manslaughter? Or would her testimony land her in prison for the rest of her life?
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Please have a seat.
How would you describe your relationship with Bob over the years?
It got rockier. It was a roller coaster of rocky.
Was there abuse by Bob on you?
Yes, there was. I was always, you no good bitch. That was my name. You no good bitch.
Why would you put up with this abuse all these years?
I loved him. I loved him. I loved him.
Nancy Seaman was advised by her attorney to say yes, to say no, to answer the questions with a yes or a no. And she didn't abide by that very well.
What happens then?
So I walked to the counter, and he still hasn't said anything. I haven't said anything. There's no eye contact being made. I slice open the sub bun the rest of the way, lay the knife down on the counter. I think it's time we talk about going our separate ways. I said, fine. I said, I am so ready for this.
All right. When he was sitting there, you're saying he didn't get up when he's yelling.
No.
And now you look and he's got that 8-inch knife that you had used.
And he's pointing with it. You know, good bitch, how could you do this? How could you do this? And he just dragged it across my hand. He said, "What is it you don't understand, bitch? I don't love you anymore."
She claimed largely verbal abuse, but she also claimed physical abuse. And there was very little documentation for it. And that was one of the weaknesses in the case.
What happens next?
He's coming toward me. I can hear him coming toward me, and I can see his feet from under my arm.
What do you do?
I'm just laying there, and I'm scared, and I'm thinking to myself, I gotta get off the floor. I gotta run somehow, because he's coming toward me, and he's mad. He's mad. And I can see his shoes, just like your shoes.
All right, what happens then?
I was getting off the floor. He grabbed my leg.
What do you do?
As I get up, I feel the handle of the hatchet. I pick it up, and I swing it at him.
How are you swinging it?
I just swung it at him, and swiped him across the face.
How many times did you swing?
I don't know. I have no idea.
She was laying on the floor, describing how her husband hurt her and so forth, and it really turned the jury off.
Did you hit him on any place that wasn't vital?
I was swinging it. I wasn't aware of. Sometimes it hit, sometimes it didn't.
So he wasn't actually punching you in the face, right?
He was bent over.
Was he punching you in the face?
He had a hold of my leg I couldn't break free.
After which blow of the 16 hatchet wounds did he stop holding on to your leg?
It would not be possible for me to determine that. This was happening in seconds.
When she did take the stand, several people felt that Nancy was not crying enough, and she didn't look remorseful. When somebody has spouse abuse inflicted on them for years, it just breaks you down. And it breaks you down so much that you've lost a lot of your emotions.
At what point did you turn the hatchet around and bash him?
But I
in
never
the forehead?
did that.
Okay.
I never turned the hatchet around.
You never turned the hatchet around?
I never intentionally turned the hatchet around. No, I did not.
Where did you get this knife from?
It was on the floor. I picked it up off the floor.
I think had she been contrite, had she talked about how desperate she was, it would have been different. But she came across feeling justified in what she did, and I think that turned the jury off.
I drag him, and I roll him on the tarp with my eyes closed. I taped it up.
No 911? No Farmington Hills? No Oakland County Sheriff? No Michigan State Police?
None of that ever entered my mind. I was in a state of shock.
Obviously, Nancy had a break in reality, which shows she didn't premeditate. It wasn't her plan that day to kill him.
Greg, I did not plan this. I didn't. I wish you'd killed me and been done with it. Hey, come on. Hey, did you do that on it? Stop it, hang up.
I believe that had Nancy called the police right away, it certainly would have benefited her case.
Was there ever any intent to kill him?
I never thought about death. I never thought about killing. I never even thought about hurting him. I just wanted him to stop hurting me.
She had testified for hours and hours, and the jury had a very, very bad reaction to her. You could hear a pin drop in that courtroom, and you could feel how tense it was.
Were you having any reaction at all that you had caused Bob's death?
I wanted to die. I didn't want to live anymore.
All right, just take a second.
I wish he had killed me.
What is battered woman syndrome? What is it?
Battered woman syndrome is, for a psychologist, is the collection of psychological signs and symptoms that occur when somebody has been battered.
Does the batterer choose any specific kind of abuse as far as physical? Is it something that may not show sometimes?
In battering relationships in middle class and upper class or professional classes, that is usually true, is that the battering occurs or the bruises occur, if there are bruises, in places where they don't show. You ask most battered women, what's the worst thing that ever happened? And it's usually something that's humiliated them, and that it's verbal, constant verbal degradation, name calling, being told that you're not good enough, that you're not doing things well enough for them. And the women, that seems to be the hardest. That's why psychologists do this kind of work, because it's the hardest to heal from.
Obviously, there's women who kill that haven't been beaten.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Or they might have been beaten, but it doesn't matter. It's not why they killed.
Well, the law in Michigan, as we testified, we were forbidden to talk about battered spouse syndrome as a causal element in Nancy Seaman's case. We were allowed to testify that she may have been abused and this may have affected her, but we could not draw the ultimate conclusion that because of the abuse, she acted as she should.
That restriction is like saying she didn't have a defense. That was her entire defense. There was no other defense.
Is it unusual for a woman not to seek any help?
No.
Is that part of the syndrome in any way?
If the woman is hiding these things, they're going to hide it from people that could offer help as well.
Based on the evidence and the fact that this case really appeared to be premeditated with the purchase of the hatchet, with the subsequent return of the hatchet to kind of cover the tracks there, with the bleaching of the floor, with the painting of the walls, wrapping the body, putting it in the back of an Explorer. I don't know if this case was a battered woman's syndrome case or not.
Did you find any indications at all that Nancy was lying to you?
No. Once a marriage starts, battering usually starts pretty early, but it may not occur with great frequency. Over time, it begins to increase. If it exists, there is a final state, which is the lethality state. And that generally occurs at some point with a woman. It's usually the woman decides to terminate the relationship. That's the most dangerous time.
If you take out self-defense in the equation, does battered woman syndrome justify first-degree premeditated murder?
No.
This time was different because this time she thought, I'm gonna die. He's telling her, you're gonna die. You're never going to enjoy that condo. I'll kill you first, bitch.
Nancy Seaman was facing a first-degree premeditated murder charge for the brutal death of her husband, Bob. But the jury had a choice. They could find her guilty of second-degree murder or manslaughter instead. To do that, the jury would have to come to the conclusion that Nancy Seaman was not only a battered wife, but that she killed Bob in self-defense.
Jury is present. You may proceed.
In order to convict Nancy, you have to believe a peaceful, well-respected schoolteacher decided to kill her husband with a hatchet. She was acting on a reasonable, honest belief that she was in danger of serious bodily harm or death. This time was different because this time she thought, I'm gonna die. He's telling her, you're gonna die. You're never going to enjoy that condo. I'll kill you first, bitch. I want to win for Nancy because I believe she deserves to be found not guilty in this case. She's been through enough. She deserves a not guilty in this case.
Bob never even had a chance to defend himself. He wasn't attacking her. He wasn't even resisting her. Not a thing. When she was finally sure Bob was dead, she stopped her attack and she left him there dying in his own blood. She wants you to believe that she was going to turn it herself in on her own terms. That's what she's about. Her terms, her control. She was trying to call the shots from the Oakland County Jail. Tell the lawyer this, tell the lawyer lie after lie after lie. Facts in this case lead to one verdict, and it's the verdict of first-degree murder. Miss I Plan Everything deserves a first-degree murder conviction.
Parties want to acknowledge that all 12 jurors are present.
Yes, Your Honor.
Will the foreperson please rise and read the verdict of the jury?
The verdict is guilty of murder in first degree.
I think this was basically a manslaughter case. I believe that she acted out of threat. She overreacted. She used a weapon and killed someone. But I think this was a manslaughter case, and I think appropriate sentence for something like this would have been 10 years.
This happened for a reason. This woman didn't just decide to pick up an axe and kill her husband brutally. Obviously, the jury disagrees with that.
What she did was a complete premeditated murder. She planned it out, she did it. She had so many choices, she had so many options. She did not need to go down this road. There was no reason for her to have done this.
I do believe that she was maybe battered, but like she said, not to the extent that she made out to be, and she was not helpless. And, you know, she could have left at any time.
The jury chose not to believe it, but also the jury did not have the testimony of Dr. Walker. Dr. Walker would have interviewed her, and after interviewing, I believe, would have said, she is the example for that syndrome. This is what happens.
As we sit in this courtroom today, we're witness to a terrible miscarriage of justice. Today, I'm being sentenced for first-degree murder, a crime that I did not commit, a crime for which I'm not guilty.
Now, I don't take any pleasure in sentencing you to life in prison, but I have no discretion in imposing the sentence I have to impose by law. The jury's a trier of fact, and I shouldn't interfere with their verdict. And I didn't, although in my mind I thought that she was battered.
Nancy's own trial judge that presided, you know, over the entire trial publicly stated 3 times, I have no doubt in my mind she did not premeditate to murder her husband. It just doesn't make sense, were his words.
We weren't surprised by the verdict or sentencing initially. The jury came back in just 5 hours and with the guilty verdict. I think it was surprising later when the judge in the case ended up overturning that verdict and reducing it to a second-degree murder charge, which an appeals court then overturned his decision and put it back to the first-degree murder.
Nancy's case is definitely the case that needs to go ultimately to the Michigan Supreme Court to change the law of battered spouses and the syndrome that it occurs in the defense of battered spouse. Michigan needs to join the other states that have it. There's no reason, absolutely no reason, that we don't have it as a defense.
I was once the face of every woman. A wife, mother, sister, daughter, friend, co-worker, neighbor, and elementary school teacher. I was cut scout den mother to your sons, and I likely sat next to you in the bleachers cheering at our children's sporting events. Now I'm a convicted murderer. I did not premeditate to kill my husband. I only premeditated to safely leave Bob without confrontation. Please support the release of battered women who have been unjustly incarcerated for defending their lives from attack from their abusers.
I think Nancy's where she should be. This was, like I said, all the evidence pointed to a first-degree murder charge, and I think that the jury got it right.
We're gonna win this fight. We're gonna win it for Nancy, and we're gonna win it for anyone else that has incurred any type of domestic violence. Nancy has a lot of hope. She's got a lot of hope that we're gonna change the law.
Nancy Seaman remains in prison, serving a life term without parole. Although she has no more appeals left, advocacy groups are still lobbying for her acquittal. I'm Ashley Banfield. Thanks for watching.